High crimes and misdemeanors. The House Judiciary Committee is taking up the impeachment investigation into President Donald Trump. How the White House is responding. Virtuous Leadership. An author tells us his plan to bring out the greatness in others. Celibacy debate. Why Catholic bishops in Germany could be on the road to a schism with the Vatican. And the Christmas spirit. A look inside the White House and its decorations for the Yuletide season. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, December 2nd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. The White House says it will not participate in the House Judiciary Committee's impeachment hearings this week. Democrats are trying to lay out their case for President Donald Trump's removal from office. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. Democrats could bring charges of bribery or high crimes and misdemeanors against President Trump, who spoke out today before leaving the White House for a trip to London.
Republicans have never, ever been so committed as they are right now and so united.
President Trump believes Republicans are coming together amid the impeachment investigation as the House Judiciary Committee prepares for its hearing on Wednesday. The president tweets, "The do-nothing Democrats get 3 constitutional lawyers for their impeachment hoax. They will need them. The Republicans get 1. Oh, that sounds fair." The White House declined the Judiciary Committee's invitation to send lawyers to Wednesday's impeachment hearing, citing a lack of fundamental fairness.
Because the whole thing is a hoax. Everybody knows it. All you have to do is look at the words of the Ukrainian president that he just issued, and you know it's a hoax.
President Trump says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirms he did absolutely nothing wrong. Zelensky told Time magazine he never talked to President Trump from the position of a quid pro quo. Democrats, including presidential hopefuls, believe President Trump has committed impeachable conduct by asking Ukraine to investigate his political rivals.
I see this proceeding as part of a much bigger theme with this president. He is someone that puts private interest, partisan interest, and his own political interests in front of the country.
Today, counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, said Chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, should be required to testify in this impeachment probe. She goes on to say that the top Democrat leading this impeachment effort should testify, and if he did, then she would testify on behalf of the White House. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Democratic presidential candidates are making vocal appeals to African American voters. That demographic will be crucial in determining the next Democratic nominee. Pete Buttigieg attended a church service yesterday led by a former North Carolina NAACP president. And Bernie Sanders visited a black congregation in South Carolina where he said Scripture calls for a focus on justice. At an African Methodist Episcopal church in Columbia, South Carolina yesterday, Senator Bernie Sanders told the congregation America is facing an unprecedented moment in history.
I think as we read from the Scriptures, but the calling of the moment now is for nothing less than justice, for doing unto others as we would like them to do unto us.
2 other candidates have chosen this moment to drop out.
Thank you, Iowa!
Montana Governor Steve Bullock announced today he's ending his 2020 campaign, saying it's become clear he won't have a shot at being his party's nominee for president.
Thank you very much.
And retired Navy Admiral Joe Sestak ended his bid Sunday. He failed to qualify for any of the Democratic debates and recently completed a walk across New Hampshire to try to drum up interest in his campaign. This weekend, Senator Cory Booker admitted his campaign is facing a do-or-die moment, saying, "If you want me in this race, if you want my voice and my message, which is resonating, then I need help." Booker says he needs contributions in order to buy more ad time. That's something that will make or break the Democrats' chance of winning the White House. Former New York City mayor and billionaire Michael Bloomberg has pledged to spend $100 million on ads targeting President Donald Trump. Fellow candidate and billionaire Tom Steyer has promised to spend $50 million. Steyer and Bloomberg are among the 16 Democrats still vying for president. President Trump says he will place tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from 2 South American countries. The president says policies from Brazil and Argentina are hurting U.S. farmers. He accuses both countries of lowering the value of their money to gain an unfair advantage in trading. The tariffs are expected to take effect immediately. China is banning American warships and military aircraft from making stops in Hong Kong. The move is in retaliation for U.S. legislation supporting anti-government protests in the semi-autonomous territory. In addition, the communist government in Beijing says it's sanctioning several American pro-democracy and human rights groups. President Trump signed 2 related bills last week supporting human rights and free speech. The measures have almost unanimous support by lawmakers who are sympathetic to protesters. They've also criticized Hong Kong police for cracking down on the pro-democracy movement. Joining me now by Skype from Bedminster, New Jersey, is Gordon Chang, an expert in Asian foreign policy and author of The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, welcome back to the broadcast. China warned the U.S. would bear the costs if the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act was approved. The president signed 2 measures related to Hong Kong. What's your reaction to the president signing them and today's reaction from China?
It was a great thing that President Trump signed those 2 bills. He showed Beijing that he's not afraid of them. And, we heard Beijing's retaliation, which was to cancel U.S. Navy port calls to Hong Kong. Well, that's not a Chinese sanction on the United States, Wyatt. That's a Chinese sanction on China, because those port calls were really important for Hong Kong. When a carrier strike group arrives in Hong Kong, they spend maybe $5 million, and that helps the Hong Kong economy. So, we shouldn't be making port calls in Hong Kong anyway. I think we should be going to Taiwan. But the point is, China really has only hurt itself right now. It's not hurting us.
When we talked to you last week, you predicted we'd see more pro-democracy protests. Yesterday, more than 10,000 people marched to try to pressure the government to address their demands. How are all these images of months of demonstrations affecting China's global image?
It's tarring China's global image. We're seeing, for instance, sympathy demonstrations on American soil, Lenin walls, or all sorts of things. And I think that essentially Beijing is their foreign policy right now is so counterproductive because they stand for things that people just don't like. Whether you're talking about religion, whether you're talking about the oppression of Uyghurs, it's race-based pan-nationalism. These are things that people abhor. And the more that China talks about these, the more that China becomes intransigent, the more China tries to sanction countries like the United States and others. I think they just tar their own image and reduce their standing in the world.
Well, noting all of those problems, in your view, what will it take to get the Beijing government to respond, if anything?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that there is anything to get Beijing to respond. The thing that is really troubling, Wyatt, is if we look over the more than 5 months of continuous protests, Beijing has been doing things to fuel these demonstrations and marches. Every time that we see protest fatigue or that maybe the mass of Hong Kong people are getting tired of the protests, Beijing will do something that will enrage the people of Hong Kong. And so that's why they've been going on for quite some time. I don't see Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, changing course. If he changes course, he has to admit a mistake. If he misses a mistake, he's very much undermining his own political position in Beijing, which could be a lot shakier than we think.
Such an important issue, and again, like we've said before, so important that we continue to shine the spotlight on what's going on in China. Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China, thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Lawmakers in England honored the 2 people killed in an attack on London Bridge. Prime Minister Boris Johnson praised the response of police and the public in confronting the terrorist.
The terrorist, the assailant was tackled within 5 minutes. Quite incredible response by the police. Also, I want to pay tribute again, as I think the whole country is, to the sheer bravery of those members of the public who went to deal with him spontaneously, putting their own lives at risk.
Johnson and other political leaders attended a vigil today to honor the victims of Saturday's terror attack. The 28-year-old suspect was shot and killed by police. He previously had been convicted of terrorist offenses. A powerful typhoon is drawing closer to the Philippines. Tens of thousands of people are fleeing to safety. Typhoon Kamuri has already knocked out power to entire villages and has caused Manila's international airport to close. The storm has winds approaching 100 miles per hour. An event taking place in Rome tomorrow will focus on leadership and the practice of human virtues. It's taking place at Angelicum University in partnership with this station, EWTN. The talk will be moderated by National Catholic Register's Solin Tadier. Alexandre Havard is the founder of the Virtuous Leadership Institute. He joins us from Rome. Alexander, welcome into the broadcast. What is virtuous leadership, and is it missing in our generation right now?
Well, virtuous leadership means that leadership for us, is not something technical. It is something that is deeply related to the concept of virtue. You know, for the ancient Greeks, virtue, virtus, is something that means power, strength, prudence, the capacity to make the right decision, courage, the capacity to stay the course, and the capacity to take risks, self-mastery, the capacity to direct your emotions. All those virtues, as you understand, are, I would say, capacities for action. These are not something technical. These are something that are related to the concept of character. So virtuous leadership means that leadership is based on character. It has nothing to do with manipulation. It is not the same thing as management. It's not about techniques. It's not about know-how. It's about whom do you want to become. This is why we use the concept of virtuous leadership. We could have used just the concept of leadership, but nowadays people would not understand what we're speaking about. So we decided to use the word virtuous leadership for this to be very clear. So for the new generation, these are very important things because we live in a world where people are focused on techniques. And we need to remember people that it is very, very important not to be focused all the time on techniques, but to be focused on self-improvement, on this idea of becoming a real human being. This is what brings happiness, and this is what brings real, I would say, real efficiency in our personal life and in our professional life.
Well, just to expand on that a little bit, because like you're saying, you teach that leadership is about the practice of the human virtues amid all the professional, personal circumstances of daily life, the stress. How can we better implement that?
Well, the key thing, if we want to practice the human virtues, I mean, first of all, we have to create a kind of environment for our life that helps us practice the human virtues. I was speaking a lot about the virtue of magnanimity, which is the virtue of people that are striving for great things. This is a very specific virtue of leaders. Leaders they want greatness. Leadership is about achieving greatness by bringing out the greatness in others. This is about magnanimity and about humility. It's about greatness and service. And in order to practice those virtues, you need first of all to create in your life an environment that is magnanimous. You need to understand who are the people you need to speak with. People that are dreamers, and at the same time, people that are capable of transforming their dreams into mission, into action. You don't find those people everywhere. You have to identify them, you have to contemplate them, and you have to spend time with them. This is the way to grow in the virtue of magnanimity.
A lot of really important ideas there, and obviously it takes courage to do all those things, and in the process, of course, we can draw closer to Christ. Alexandre Havard, founder of the Virtuous Leadership Institute, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thank you.
Coming up, the latest in the escalating tension between the United States and Iran. The head of the Diocese of Duluth in Minnesota has died. Bishop Paul Serba suffered a fatal heart attack before celebrating Mass yesterday. The diocese says, quote, "Words do not adequately express our sorrow at the sudden loss of our shepherd." Bishop Serba was 59 years old. A report says there could be an upcoming avalanche of lawsuits against the Catholic Church. The Associated Press says new sexual abuse laws in 15 states could lead to thousands of claims, and the potential payouts could surpass $4 billion. Among the states with new legislation that could allow the lawsuits, California, New Jersey, and New York. A human rights group says more than 200 people have been killed in Iran in protests over government-set gasoline price hikes. Tehran disputes those numbers, though it has not released a count of its own. Iranian officials say up to 200,000 people have participated in the protests. Some of them have attacked banks and police stations. Iran shut down internet access to the outside world amid the unrest. Join us now for analysis is Steve Yates, the CEO of DC International Advisory and former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Steve, welcome back into the broadcast.
My pleasure, thank you.
How do you think these protests will play out? And amid all of this violence and how scary it is, could this be an opening for those who want to limit or end Iran's nuclear program?
I do think it's an important potential opening. Unfortunately, we have much of our European ally base that spent the last week talking about how to give more money to the theocratic regime in Iran and to revive the deal that has clearly failed to hold back the Iranian nuclear program. So I think it's an incredibly important time for the president to be in Europe, meeting with leaders of NATO to talk about what are we going to do to have a more unified response. Because really, our European friends need to step up to this challenge and stand with the people in Iran. We've had this time talking about Hong Kong, and the context is very, very similar in Iran, and we really should not have a repeat of 2009 where the world turns the other way and allows the theocrats to crack down again.
Let me follow up with you on that. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been very critical of the Iran's regime and the response to the demonstrations. So how should the U.S. be more involved?
Well, number one, I think that pushing the Europeans to bear more of their fair share of this burden is very important. Number two, there's a technical challenge here. What's happened in a lot of parts of the world where these demonstrations come up is that the government shuts down internet access, as you reported. And really, our government has not invested the time and resources, I think, to meet this challenge. If we're going to tell these people, as Pope John Paul II said to the Poles, at a different time and circumstance, that you are not alone. These people are standing alone, completely isolated from the wider world and from each other when their regimes turn off social media and the internet. We've got to find a way to help put these tools of communication back into their hands so that we get accurate reporting on which to base policy, but also so that they know that we're there with them.
The Trump administration has placed serious economic sanctions on Iran. Can you update us on if they're working, if they're effective? And unfortunately, it looks like the people of Iran are suffering because of their regime.
Well, it's always the case that when you have tyrannical regimes and then we have sanctions against those regimes, the people at the top find a way to make their day. They have their money, they have their access to privilege, and the people of those countries sometimes suffer twice. They suffer from autocracy and then they suffer from economic downturns. There's no question that the financial pressure the Trump administration has increased has been felt in Iran, I think is fueling some sense of the dissatisfaction. It seems evident that more and more of the Iranian people, who are a great people and a great civilization, are fed up with this small percentage of theocrats who belong to a radical ideology who are hurting their civilization and their well-being. Really, it's just time for us to help them be able to be masters of their own destiny, I think.
Do you think this is ultimately going to come to a head with the government? In other words, is this going to result in even more violence?
If we have a repeat of 2009, where the United States and our allies sort of yawn and turn the other way, the regime in Iran feels like it has a blank check to be as brutal as it needs to be to its people. We have reports of hundreds of people a day that the troops will come in and they just open fire and they're taking them out. And we have no idea how many more we don't know about because of the internet blackout. And so I think that the situation is at least as dire as Tiananmen Square was 30 years ago in China, and it's really time for us to find a way to get to a solution.
Okay, such an important story that we're going to continue to follow. Steve Yates, the CEO of DC International Advisory and a former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Up next, analysis as Catholic bishops in Germany consider whether to eliminate the celibacy requirement for priests. And the White House is ready for Christmas. Pope Francis celebrates the start of the new liturgical year. He says in Advent we can find Jesus by focusing on the needs of others.
Si deve tradurre dunque in un impegno di vigilanza.
At his Sunday address to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father asked the faithful to be awake for the coming of the Lord, not just by keeping our eyes open, but by trying to help those around us who are suffering. The Holy Father also calls for nativity scenes to be more widely displayed this Christmas season. In a letter to the faithful released yesterday, Pope Francis calls nativity scenes a wonderful sign, and he says he hopes they appear in more homes, schools, and workplaces. For more on this story, including how and where nativity scenes began centuries ago, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. The German Bishops' Conference and the Central Committee of German Catholics are undertaking a 2-year process of reckoning and reform. Cardinal Reinhard Marx, the president of the German Bishops' Conference, says the 2-year discernment process will tackle key issues arising from the clerical sex abuse crisis. The bishops are set to take a look at the Church's teaching on priestly celibacy, human sexuality, and the role of women in the Church. Anian Christoph Wimmer, editor-in-chief of Catholic News Agency Deutsch, joins me now by Skype from Munich to talk more about the meeting. Christoph, welcome into the broadcast. Pope Francis back in June asked the German bishops to follow a synodal path closer to his vision. What does Cardinal Marx hope to achieve? In other words, what's his goal?
Well, there's a couple of stated goals going through the synodal process. Why? The first one is to ensure that those people who are currently within the Church will hopefully stay within the Church. That has been stated. But secondly, of course, it is mainly to deal with the abuse crisis and reaching those people that have not been reached by the Church in Germany, in fact, for several decades.
Well, how involved do you think lay people will be in these discussions, or is this just going to be German bishops?
So officially, the Association of German Lay Catholics, the Central Committee, as they're called, are part and parcel of the process. However, critics are pointing out that this particular committee is not really representative of a lot of the practicing Catholics who do have concerns about the process.
And that sounds legitimate, because there are some critics who say some of the ideas being discussed here could be damaging and in some cases bring about a schism within the Church in Germany. Is that a valid concern, do you think?
Well, given that Pope Francis, the Holy Father himself, seems to think so, and a number of leading cardinals and theologians, I would argue it is justified to share the concern that a number of practicing Catholics have also voiced in public over the last couple of months on CNA Deutsch, the German edition of the Catholic News Agency, and a number of other media. In particular, it is about any sort of deviation from what is really the doctrine of the faith. This in particular includes sexual morality, but also the role of women in the Church, the sacramental understanding, the ministry, the offices of the Church being perhaps changed, not for the better, and in fact leading, yes, as you said, towards a schism.
It is a very real concern, and obviously one we're going to continue to follow. Give us a sense, though, of the current state of the Church in Germany today.
The Church in Germany is in dire straits, and that's not putting too fine a point on it. We've had several decades, especially in the last sort of 20, 30 years, where there have been hundreds of thousands of people actively quitting the Church. As you probably know, in Germany, people pay a church tax. So if you're Catholic, you're registered, so the numbers are extremely accurate. Now, we know that people participating in the sacraments, from baptism all the way to the end of your natural life, those numbers have declined, but at the same time, the numbers of people attending church have declined very seriously over the last few years. In most parishes, in most dioceses, less than 10% of the Catholics are actively going to church of a Sunday. And when it comes to leading a sacramental life, when it comes to following the dictates or the teaching of the Church, it's even less.
A lot of concerns there in Germany, and obviously a reason for Catholics across the world to pray for the Church in Germany. Anian Christoph Wimmer, editor-in-chief of Catholic News Agency Deutsch, thanks so much for keeping us up to speed.
Thank you kindly, Wyatt.
Finally tonight, it's only the second day of December, but the White House is already set for Christmas. This video shows off the decorations inside the executive mansion. It includes lots of red, white, and blue. This year's theme is the Spirit of America. The First Lady says she is excited for everyone to experience the beauty of the Christmas season. She also continued her tradition of hanging wreaths on each of the White House's 106 exterior windows. Another good reminder that our celebration of Christmas is right around the corner. And with that, we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. We leave you tonight with another look at even more of the Christmas decorations at the White House. Good night, and God bless.